send it to me? No? I'll check out. How's that?
Is that on now? Okay. Well, good afternoon. My name is Michelle Oldroyd, and I am a member of the Utah Bar Civics Committee. I am also the director of the Lieutenant Governor's Commission on Civic and Character Education, and that's what prompts me to be with you this afternoon to talk about Constitution Day. And I think I would be remiss if I just didn't clearly start with a thanks to each of you for being willing to dedicate your time and your busy calendars to our youngest citizens. The Bar's celebration of Constitution Day is a 4-year tradition. This marks the 4th time that we've sent members of the Bar and members of the judiciary into our local classrooms. We've been in over 500 classrooms in those 4 years in all 41 school districts of Utah, which is a remarkable accomplishment that we have been able to span the state and to get into a lot of rural schools as well as urban schools. We've been in Title I schools, we have been in parochial and charter schools, as well as traditional elementary and secondary classrooms. So it is a great accomplishment, I think, to have our youngest citizens know and get to know and experience professionals firsthand. It's one thing to read about the Constitution in a textbook or to even talk about it in a classroom that's dynamic, and I think it's an added layer of learning that comes from really interacting with someone and asking good questions and getting good feedback from that person and interacting in a lesson specific to the Constitution that will allow these students, I think, to not only talk about their civic understanding and their place in our communities, but also to potentially engage them with thoughts of higher education and their own professional development. Particularly if you are in a secondary classroom, that becomes a relevant part of the conversation. But I certainly think sparking that for elementary students to think about what they want to do down the road, how they can impact their community, not only as an ordinary voting citizen, a potential juror, a potential litigant, a potential attorney or judge in a courtroom, but how they might also be a part of public service on a wide-scale level as their professional calling. I think it's a great thing to spark in terms of interest for these youngsters. Let me ask some questions so that we can kind of understand the information that you need to know about here. How many of you have volunteered in years past for this program? So several of you are doing this for the first time then, this year. Great. It's wonderful to welcome new folks to this calling and to this endeavor. I think that this will become a stalwart tradition of the Bar. There's a lot of interest from teachers and school districts alike, and it seems that there's a lot of cooperation amongst the members of the Bar and the judiciary to participate. So I'm pleased to welcome those of you who are doing this for the first time. How many of you have registered on the Bar's website already for your classroom assignments? So some of you have not yet had an opportunity. If you have technology with you and you want to try to access the page while we're talking, you're welcome to. And if not, the website for registration is civics.utahbar.org. And that website has a place not only for teachers, so if you know educators and they're looking for a way to get involved with the program, they can click a link and register their classrooms. But you too can go on the attorney link and match your schedule with an open available classroom assignment and know immediately where you're headed, the classroom teacher's name, and that your contact information will be exchanged by that system so that you can be in direct contact with one another prior to your visit to that classroom. And if you haven't visited that website, you'll also find your lesson plans there. So those of you who've registered, how many of you are headed to an elementary classroom? Do you know? Okay, and how many of you are headed to a secondary classroom, middle school or high school? So it's important to know your audience, and it's important to think about the lesson plan that you take with you. On that website, there is a page specific for lesson plans. There is a separate plan for elementary students and a separate plan for secondary students. Though if this is your first time doing this, I would actually recommend reading both lesson plans. I tend to borrow from both, regardless of my audience. There are pieces of that elementary school lesson plan that I really like for their interactivity and their simplicity in design. And I don't think that they are lost in terms of point or poignancy on a secondary audience. And just like in the secondary lesson plan, I think there are some very salient points to be made and definitions given to terminology that are useful to talking to the elementary school audience. Both lesson plans are designed such that you would begin your conversation with the students kind of establishing a common language about the law, about a courtroom, about the three branches of government, and trying to explain to the students the parts and roles of a courtroom such that they can then have a more cogent and understandable conversation with you, so that when you're using terms like plaintiff or prosecution, they know the distinction between a civil case that you might be talking about or a criminal case. It also allows them to ask you good questions. You will find going to the classroom, most of what you will concentrate on will be dealing with the questions of the youngsters. And they're not tangent or unrelated points. And in fact, they become very salient and very insightful questions and curiosities, I think, that they offer to you. Some of them are personal, based on their experience or based on something they've heard in their home or in their community, and they want to talk that through, which makes perfect sense. But many of the questions are curiosities that they have either from being in class, watching the news, maybe they've been reading current events in their classroom. And I think your contribution to that conversation for them is really invaluable. Offering your opinion, your expertise, your experience will really help them understand these concepts in a completely different way. Those of you who've been on the website, any questions I can respond to or any concerns about your registration process? Please.
Okay, so I signed up for some sessions at Oak Hills Middle School.
Yes.
And I thought I'd get like an email confirming it, and I didn't. But so I was concerned. I went back in to see if my classes were still there. They were no longer there. So I assumed that I had signed up, but then registering today I wasn't here. So, and I haven't received any other further emails.
So the confirmation email is typically coming directly from a teacher, and you should have received or will have access to that teacher's contact information based on your registration. So you're welcome to reach out and confirm with them. But checking to ensure that your classes are no longer on the schedule is also a great double check there. The system should automatically remove them. If you are completely registered for that class and you have filled that spot, it should remove them instantly. Even within moments, you could relog on to that same page and see that they are no longer available for anyone else to reserve. So that is sort of a double check there in terms of confirmation. But the teachers are instructed that they should reach out to you, communicate with you directly. Some of the things that the teachers communicate to attorneys about are things like parking, where to park at the school, because on it, particularly secondary schools, it's a very relevant concern where there's student parking and visitor parking. You don't want to take it from a high school if you can help it, so you might as well go ahead and park where there's designated spaces. Almost every teacher will communicate to you about needing to visit the main office to obtain a visitor's pass or a visitor's identification so that you can travel through the school and be a recognizable visitor to the appropriate authorities there. That's a very useful step in the process of you getting there. So give yourself a few minutes the morning or afternoon that you arrive to ensure that you do accommodate that request. Those two things become the primary things that they want to confirm for you. There were a couple of hands. Please.
There's just a slight delay in the confirmation. I just found out from the bar as well that there's a slight delay, so you should be getting that shortly.
Have you registered multiple days before now?
I registered like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. I'm in the same boat as Sam. I'm just trying to figure out, okay, I don't remember who the teacher is or contact information. What if it's not there?
A quick email also if you're concerned if the system is operating properly. Christy Abad is the contact here at the State Bar. Christy, CHRISTY .abad, ABAD, at, I believe it's utahbar.org is her email address, and she'll be a great contact resource person for you. She set up the system for both the teachers to register as well as for the attorneys to register. So if you did have a concern, she could certainly verify for you via email very quickly whether or not your logistics are in place. And there were a couple of other hands. Please.
When I signed up, it clearly said that the teacher and the attorney will both get an email confirming, but it won't come out until after this training. That's what it said.
And it was supposed to take a few days for the system to generate those automatically, and there may be some delay because of the bulk of registrations that are ongoing. I learned also before I was walking into the session today that there are about 90 classrooms awaiting volunteers. So if you have room in your schedule to potentially take another placement, or if you have a colleague that may also be interested in attending a classroom session, please don't hesitate to direct them to the website and encourage their involvement. You'll notice in the e-bulletin that's coming out within the next week to the entire bar membership that there will be also an announcement about the program and an encouragement for everyone to participate. So you can forward that on to friends and colleagues alike as well to encourage participation. Please.
It's civics.utahbar.org.
Yes, that's the website for both attorneys and teachers. So if your teachers ask you how to access your lesson plan, for example, or how to view the materials that you're going to bring to the classroom, or, for example, if you'd like to encourage them to copy any part of your lesson plan to have available to the students before your arrival or at the time of your arrival, they can access a PDF version of your lesson plan and get copies available there in the school for you in advance and see everything that you're going to discuss. For example, in the secondary lesson, there's a vocabulary game that offers you the opportunity to have small groups of students sort of competing with each other to correctly define all the terms. And it's more or less a cut and paste worksheet where you place and match terminology with the definition all on a worksheet. And that worksheet's available for the teachers to print and copy ahead of time so that you wouldn't have to bring that with you unless you chose to do so. So the teachers can access that in advance if you'd prefer to have that available. There was one more hand. I want to ensure I responded to the question before we move on.
Well,
Please.
I had a question, but it's already been answered.
Okay, good. I also want to speak briefly about the notion that in Utah, we have 2 new graduation requirements for all secondary students. All high school seniors are required to attend a half-year civics course before graduating from high school. It discusses everything from basics around the branches of government and separation of powers, a brief discussion of the rule of law, which I would love to see bolstered, but we have to cover a lot of material in half a year. A brief discussion as well of an independent judiciary and why we have that system. But it encourages students and in fact assists students in registering to vote, in ensuring that if they have been or are eligible to be called for jury duty, that they know what to expect on a summons and how to read that, and how to get yourself appropriately communicating with the court system that's called you to serve in a juror capacity. So those classrooms are by and large the classrooms that our attorneys are visiting in high schools. Now this year will be the first year that those classes are being requested also to take the Citizenship Test, the United States Citizenship Test, as part of the curriculum of that class. All students are encouraged in Utah to at some point experience in their secondary career an opportunity to take that test and pass the test as part of the passage of their civics curriculum for Utah. And in years past, a few attorneys have taken that citizenship test as part of the lesson planning that they do for this Constitution Day event and celebration. And if you'd like to do that, the website for that is cis.gov. And that test and its flashcards to study from are all available there. And there's a teacher worksheet page there already on that website, so you wouldn't have to generate anything for the teachers. They could accompany you there, or you could encourage them to visit there to have materials ready for the students. CIS for Citizenship and Immigration Services.gov. And it's a great resource if you wanted to point out some online resources, either to the teacher or to the students if you're talking about particular issues or even current events. That's a great website resource, but it is also a unique facet of Utah's civics curriculum, and you may want to either be aware of the requirements, so if you get the question, you know what the students are speaking of, or that you could incorporate it into your remarks for the student. It does seem to be both a commonly discussed part of Utah's curriculum as well as sometimes as a bit of a controversial subject for some folks. But it seems to open a door for us to at least have a conversation with our youngest citizens about a true appreciation for their citizenship rights and responsibilities in relationship to those who immigrate to the country. So that's a unique opportunity that we have here to sort of open up this conversation in a slightly broader way. I want to point out also that our lesson plans this year are focusing on 3 things. We're focusing on how laws are written, how laws are enforced, and how laws are interpreted, with a goal then that we're correspondingly discussing the branches of government whose duties correspond to those verbs. So legislators primarily writing the laws, the executive branch primarily enforcing the law, and then the judicial branch interpreting the meaning of the law for communities. And in particular, we've been encouraged by the State Office of Education to think about how to expand what we mean by civics curriculum for students. So how can they interact with this process of the rule of law? For example, you might encourage some of your students to try to write a law in the moment of your visit to the classroom. Ask the students to think about a problem that concerns them, either in their school or at their home or in their community, and to think through a rule that might help remedy the situation that they're concerned about, and have a writing exercise with the students, creatively trying to think about how to resolve those issues. So how can you encourage people to speak to one another with respect when they have a difference of opinion? How might you encourage youngsters to receive the kinds of rights and privileges that they want while correspondingly paying attention to the responsibilities that they have as our youngest citizens? Ask the students to think about issues that are pressing in their neighborhood. Is there a vandalism issue perhaps in their neighborhood? Is there an issue of safety that they're concerned about that they would like to have addressed? And perhaps there may already be a law written to handle the issue. The students may or may not be aware, but that writing exercise is particularly unique in terms of what it will generate and the challenges that it will allow you to address with the students, because it's a harder exercise than you think. If you have pen and paper in front of you, contemplate that. In a few sentences, try to write a rule that would allow you to resolve an issue that you care about, that you think everyone would interpret the same way. And then think about it if you read it as the person sitting next to you at the table. It's a lot harder than you think. I did the same exercise recently in a classroom, and one of the students said that the rule should be, don't talk with your mouth full. This was an elementary school classroom, so you can see the kinds of levels of issues. They were contemplating manners and how to have appropriate respect for people. And I said, well, does everyone think of having their mouth full in the same way? And the student looks at me like, how could you misinterpret what having your mouth full means? And then we started to discuss it. Does having a piece of chewing gum in your mouth contemplate the same thing in the rule as perhaps a mouthful of a sandwich or your dinner? Is that the same thing? Does it mean you're breaking the rule if you speak with gum in your mouth as opposed to speaking with a mouthful of your favorite burger? And the students didn't realize until we started to discuss the rules that they wanted to talk about just how open for interpretation our language is. And that writing exercise was a really lovely way of just briefly trying to talk about both the challenges and the opportunities we have as citizens in directing our law, in speaking to our elected officials about how to shape the laws for things that concern us, as well as then appreciating the role of the judiciary in interpreting those laws for a wide population. One of the things that you can think through is this notion that we are celebrating Constitution Day with our visit. And if you think about it, it's a remarkable thing. The Constitution was drafted at a time when there were 3 million people who were relatively like-minded, all in one geography, all with relatively similar life experiences, similar ages, similar families, even similar religions, for all the distinctions that we might have made amongst the founding fathers' religions for the 13 colonies of our country. They're relatively similar, especially when you contemplate now that that same Constitution that was drafted governs over 300 million people across 4 time zones, remarkably different geography across the United States, and a wealth of different experiences, different languages, different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds, more difference perhaps than we even have words to describe than there are similarities. And yet those same principles are governing that group as we're governing the very like-minded 3 million at our inception. And it's a really interesting concept for older students, I think, who can grasp those notions to think about. How do you interpret one word or one turn of phrase to matter to the entire classroom the same way? It's a challenge that their teachers have to experience all the time, but youngsters are experiencing it and dealing with it very differently. We see their responses to conflict now on our news fairly regularly, and sometimes not always in the best light. We're seeing, unfortunately, distinct fractures in our communities and even amongst our young people in our public institutions. I think this exercise, this program for Constitution Day, is very poignant and coming at a time when our communities really need the kinds of messages that are uniquely delivered by lawyers and judges about how to have respect for our public institutions, about how to challenge them appropriately. We encourage dissent, and in fact, dissent is the lifeblood of the law. Although we disrespect and disobey and disavow in a particular way, we know how to do that with a certain amount of values and core beliefs and core actions that accompany that same kind of dissenting view. And students aren't encouraged to think about dissent that way. Students are sometimes encouraged to think about dissent in very polarizing and very extreme ways of both language and behavior. And I think lawyers and judges can offer to these students ways to get involved in their community, even to reshape and to change things in very productive and effective ways. So our hope is that you can bring some of that same spirit to your teaching. The outlying opinion, the very off-the-wall question that may seem like a tangent or might even derail a little bit of your point, really could be the thread that allows more students to participate, or the thread of the conversation that allows the students to see how what you're talking about really does relate to them, or their home, or their backyard, or an issue that they're even facing as an individual. So think through broadly some of the messages that you can bring. As well, a byproduct of this, I think, is you being willing to open yourself up to a bit of questioning. And it feels a little intimidating to think about that. I think, 35, 45 students sometimes challenging you with questions. But in truth, it's about getting to know you. It's about wanting to know, why did you want to be a lawyer or go to law school? How hard was it to go? How did you pay for it? I've had a number of lawyers who have participated in this program talk about how the students wanted to be very concrete. How did you get to where you are? What did you do? What were the steps that got you from where I'm sitting right now to where you are standing in front of our classroom today? And it's a unique opportunity for them to talk through concretely that there's no magic way of shoving open a law school door. But there's a great deal of hard work, a number of small steps, and some dedication to certain principles that if you keep your head and your efforts all on one path, you really can get there regardless of the background from which you come. And it's a great message for these youngsters that any one of us can access our public institutions, certainly the opportunity to go to law school or to have higher education or to pursue whatever professional goal they might have. They might learn that they never want to be involved with the law through this exercise. And that's okay. At least they know not to go through the courthouse in the back door, right? They know to go through the front door of the courthouse. They can either go with a summons or go to have an issue resolved. But they know that they really don't relish this process or don't like the adversary system and want to figure out a better way. That's a wonderful byproduct of this lesson plan. Learning that you don't want to go to law school is just as relevant as learning that you do want to go to law school, because those are the people we'd like to draw in, right? Those with a passion, those with a certain heart for being there, because that's part of what these youngsters will tap into from each of you, is that same spirit with which you wanted to serve and go into your community and make a difference. And this is, in fact, the difference that you're making in a very concrete way. For this week of Constitution Day, and even in the coming few weeks, you may notice if you go to the website after this coming week that there are still a few classrooms, some toward the tail end of September and a few in the beginning of October, that have still requested speakers. So if you can't participate with us this week of Constitution Day, look ahead. Perhaps there's still some room for you to make a contribution. The other piece of our lesson planning that I wanted to emphasize and highlight, because it's become sort of part and parcel of what we offer to the students, is a very interactive tone to the lesson. The goal for the elementary lesson is for students to interact and have courtroom argument over a trial setting set in the situation of Cinderella and her stepsisters, with the stepsisters being prosecuted for potential cruelty. And the terms of the statutes are all laid out in the materials. The fact pattern is, of course, laid out in a way that allows everyone to have common knowledge about what we're speaking of, not just working off of the sense of the fairy tale or the Disney movie, but instead really working from a common set of facts and parameters. And the hope is that the students would really interact, taking sides, that you might even assign roles or redesign the classroom to have it look more like a courtroom, moving a desk up front for someone to be perceived of as a judge, or even several desks and have a jury, and for you to manage the process perhaps then, and serve in the judicial capacity, and then have a witness stand, and then multiple sets of tables for counsel to make arguments or ask questions or work together as representing either side, either the prosecution or defense. And the secondary lesson is set up as an appellate argument. It gives you the opportunity actually to see a problem in a community, realize how the legislature has responded to it, have an opportunity for you to understand how that legislative response yielded a trial and a response by the judicial branch in a trial for one of the residents of the city, I believe it's Liberty City, and then to have an appellate argument about the fairness of that process. Was due process in fact granted? Were the laws written in a way that could be fairly interpreted and understandable before the person was prosecuted? Would you know the parameters of your behavior if you saw the Liberty City laws ahead of time? Those kinds of questions of due process for an appellate argument. It's the setup then that you could offer to have a panel of students serve as appellate judges in the classroom, changing desks or tables around, allowing two sets of opinions to be offered by an appellant and an appellee, as well as to potentially offer roles for students to serve as either the press or the interested community members, and see how that voice responds to what goes on in the courtroom and what you can do if you don't agree with what occurs in a courtroom. Right? Our courts don't work like American Idol, where we phone in after the fact and tell whether or not we'd like someone to stay or not stay, or win or not win. And the students sometimes experience frustration about that and want to talk through, well, what is the next step? If we don't like what happens in a courtroom, are we stuck? And for high school students in particular, there's a frustration there that they couldn't shape or change or influence something that they disagree with, perhaps in a courtroom. So there's a lovely conversation to happen there about both the legislative process, crafting the law, the trial process that existed in the fact pattern, and then allowing students to argue for the fairness or unfairness of that outcome, and then to see if they disagree or agree with the panel of judges. The debriefing of those interactive activities is also really important for your teaching. If you can build in time in your visit to have the interaction and then have a few minutes to talk candidly with the students about their experiences. What did you see? What did you hear? What was it like to be a particular role? I mean, think through in an elementary classroom, to be the accused. What is that like, to have your classmates accusing you of doing something wrong? Or, in the flip side, what's it like to be the victim and to have to respond to something in open court and to sit there and contemplate that you might have to look your accuser in the face? What is that role like? What does that do? How does that feel? How can you help safeguard both of those people's rights? Because on either side of that case will be someone whose rights deserve your attention, both as counsel and as a member of the community. So there's some great debrief questions that are already built into the lesson plan. You don't need to generate the debrief questions. They're already there for you. They're also there for the teachers, such that if you don't get an opportunity to fully debrief something, or the teachers would like to continue that debrief process, they can fully engage that upon your departure as well. They can keep asking those questions. They can hearken back to a portion of your lesson at a later classroom date or time. Does that make sense? Does that yield any questions or comments, concerns about the lesson plans? Please.
I don't find the lesson plan to be all that interesting. I thought I would just ignore that and go with my own plan. What's your position on that?
I think that's welcome. I think that whatever creativity you'd like to bring to this, or whatever ingenuity or design that you have that you'd like to offer to the students, I think is welcome. I think there are some key pieces, though, of the lesson planning that have value. So I would ensure that whatever you bring to the table offers some instruction about similar principles, because those civics concepts are drawn from the core curriculum for the civics understanding of students at their particular learning level for the state of Utah. So the teachers are relying on you teaching certain or emphasizing certain concepts that are part of the core curriculum. I would also ensure that some of the debrief questions that are sort of insightful and poignant in your mind could be corollaries of what you teach or instruct to, by way of making points about whatever interactivity you'd like to bring. But I don't think that there's any qualm or quarrel with you bringing whatever dose of yourself you'd like to bring to the table. In fact, that's happened quite frequently. Some are completely abandoning the lesson plans as prepared and taking a whole other track with the students. And I think the students are better off for it. You'll have a certain resonance with the material, you'll have a certain passion for what you bring and want to speak about, and they're better off for that message, so long as it lines up with some of the key values and key learning objectives that we're trying to impart. Any other questions or comments? Concerns about the lesson plans? Has anyone had a problem accessing the plan? Okay, I just wanted to be sure that everybody's had an opportunity. If you have any issues, again, accessing those plans, they can be emailed to you directly. So if you do have a concern about getting that material ahead of time, don't hesitate to reach out to the bar or to the civics committee to make sure that you have the resources that you need ahead of time for going to the classroom. And in order to wrap up, one of the things that I want to think through is a discussion about what the question and answer portion of the day should focus on. Classroom management isn't necessarily something that you're intending to take on or even wanting to take on as part of being a guest to a classroom, a secondary or an elementary classroom. But I think it's particularly relevant. You may want to inquire, for example, ahead of time, how many students you'll be greeting. In some of our classrooms, you might be fortunate enough to find 20 or 25 students. But in some of our largest classrooms, you may find 40 students at once that you're working with. And when you contemplate that as your daily task as a teacher, you'll have a newfound appreciation for what it means to try to impart knowledge to a group of people. I mean, think about it with your small bodies, third graders, 40 of them all at once, trying to get your arms around them and get them to sit for any one thing all at the same time. That's a task unto itself. But even when you contemplate secondary and older students, it is a task to get 40 students to be on the same page, thinking through similar concepts, talking candidly with one another in a respectful way. And it will cause you to prepare slightly differently if you're in one of those larger classrooms. You may even find, and much to our astonishment, we found classrooms where all the students didn't have their own desk. Or students were sharing textbooks in certain classrooms because there weren't enough to go around. So it will give you a glimpse at some of the challenges that our classrooms are facing. But it also gives you a point of inspiration because you're not relying on a desk or one textbook that day. You're in fact asking the students to get up, stretch themselves, stretch their minds, think through civics in a different way, enact civics in their classrooms in a different way. This may be the first time ever that they've done something in social studies as opposed to heard something in social studies or saw something in their social studies classroom. I mean, think about it. It's so different to hear dates and facts and figures about the Constitution than to do what the Constitution talks about and to think it through your own experience of the parameters of the rights of the accused or what constitutes a fair trial proceeding in our court system. It's such a unique opportunity for you to really awaken for them that social studies is not a class that they have to memorize, but social studies is part and parcel of who they are and what they'll contribute long after they leave a Utah classroom. So we really want to encourage you to think through some of those planning logistics ahead of time. How many students? The level of class that you're speaking to. On occasion, we do have classrooms ranging from English as a second language, civics classrooms, which include perhaps immigrant or refugee students. So you might want to open yourself up to some questions or hearing about their experience of American civics and the American rule of law. as well all the way up to high school AP classes and concurrent enrollment classes that are college-level courses. So they're thinking through problems of current events and current policy in a completely different way than the typical average class. And their writing skills and their critical thinking skills may be much more developed and allow you to do some things with the lesson planning or even your own design of lesson that you couldn't do in a typical classroom. You may encourage them, for example, to be writing along with you, or even think through giving them an assignment amidst your presentation. Write an opinion paragraph before we leave today and turn it in to your teacher, whether or not you agree with the point that American courtrooms are basically a fair system and that we've set up a fair system for understanding the rights of the accused, for example, or for giving victims an opportunity to be heard in our communities and to have their grievances addressed in a very fair and reasonable way. Ask the students' opinions, ask them to write and think critically on paper about that. To express an opinion and to support it, that's part and parcel of what we do, right? That is lawyering 101. Express an argument, find a way to back it up. And to ask these students to do it in their own language with a very creative writing assignment is a direct way of influencing their thought process, one, about whether or not they potentially want to pursue this as part of their professional calling, but also how to think through, in a legitimate way, dealing with policy issues. It's not as easy as it seems. I mean, some students will be inclined to straddle the fence, and those fence straddlers need to be tipped. They need to be pushed. They need to be encouraged to take a side and stick up for it, even if it's not necessarily the first opinion you might have yourself, or even if it's not the most passionately you feel about something. Take a side, pick a side, defend your argument. There's a lovely message that you can give there as a lawyer. We are not necessarily our client's arguments, and in fact, very often we are not our client's arguments at all, and should not be so closely identified with our client's arguments. We may have personal opinions that sway us to one side of the law or another, or sway us to our particular professional endeavor, but we operate through our expertise in supporting arguments regardless of where they're generated. And we know the value of that. And we know the value of having someone sit on the other side. Having a smart person to argue with and go toe-to-toe with is the best part of lawyering. Right? It's the greatest part of who our colleagues are in the bar. Smart, engaged, inclined people who want to do good, standing on the other side of an issue to tell you what they think. I can't think of a better argument for going to law school than that, and I really can't think of a better way to shape our civics classrooms than offering the students a chance to participate in that. That's really part and parcel of what we are celebrating with Constitution Day, is the chance to have an opinion regardless of what it is, and to find support for it. Even if it's the most minority of view, even if it's only you in the classroom with your one hand raised as the only person speaking to that point, it's relevant, it's valuable, and it should be heard. And that's one of the things that we can offer to the students and facilitating their conversation. Any other questions or comments or concerns about being in the classroom or engaging the students at this level? I really want to thank you for your time. I know that it's hard to give an hour or two to going to the classroom, but there's a great deal of preparation in advance for going. So this is not a 1 hour long endeavor. We understand that, and we really want to respect what you're doing to contribute to our classrooms. It makes such a difference to these youngsters. The feedback we receive, the letters and emails that we receive from teachers and classrooms, and I think you'll even be surprised in the moment. Very organically, you'll experience a great deal of satisfaction, but also a great deal of lift, personally and professionally, to having gone and experienced these youngsters through whatever lesson you bring, whether it be one of the ones designed there on the website or something else you're inspired to bring. I encourage you to communicate back to the bar. Please let us know your experience. Good, bad, or otherwise. We'd certainly like to be able to correct or remedy any problems that people experience, but we'd also like to celebrate with you those wins that we feel like we've enjoyed a classroom or a particular teacher or set of students. And if you feel that the teacher wanted more follow-up or was in fact inclined to look for other resources, please don't hesitate to direct them either to the Bar Civics Committee, to me directly. Our commission can often serve as a resource or a help. We fund field trips for students in Utah to go and visit historical locations or locations relevant to their learning in their civics classrooms, going to our courthouses, visiting our national parks, visiting state and local agencies, and experiencing government live and in person. So we're happy to offer that to teachers as well. If you'd like to direct them to the commission, you're welcome to do that. As well, they're more than welcome to contact the bar, and they can get them in touch with the appropriate resource. So thank you again for dedicating your time, and I hope you enjoy yourselves as much as we have in these last 4 years.
How you been? Good. Glad to see you. Glad to see you outside. Okay.
Good luck. Enjoy your time.
I haven't been.
So good meeting you. Take care. Enjoy your class. And I hope to see you at Los Angeles. Glad to have you.
Not enough.
My pleasure.
So have a good run into you.
Likewise.
It's been a while.
We'll see you at the next function.
Absolutely. That accent.
Okay. Good.
Thank you.
Good to hear from you.
Thank you.
For not so great purposes, I'm sure.
So, I guess my inclination is, your class is ending on 90 minutes rather than 60 minutes.
Yes.
So, I guess my inclination is to still do the mock skills core.
Take a drink
For
of
the
the
road,
road.
leave a lot of or off-the-wall questions on integration, questions on
Even finding the right resource, well, you find information. It may not be you, but you can direct them where to head, where to look, who to talk to, what questions they're allowed to ask, ways to incorporate their parents into the conversation. Very often, I think young people kind of struggle with, I can't ask my parents this question, but I need an answer to know where to go or what to do. Or my parents don't speak the language very well, so they're uncomfortable, and I'm their spokesperson. So how do I navigate that
and
for them?
often the child is a big interpreter.
Yes, and I think that that may be some of the things that you might run into, where to direct them and how to direct them to do that. I think saving time for that's really important. I also think you may even want to open the lesson with a bit of that before you do the interactive piece, just to get their buy-in a little bit, to know and understand that you're appreciating that they experience the law differently. Some of them may have some relationship to what we're going to talk about today.
I don't use the medical introduction. I try and establish rapport with them first to get time.
Yes, and to ensure that you're validating that they might know the law differently than the typical average teenage audience, because they've already experienced authority in certain ways,
Is that
negatively,
sufficient?
stereotypically, unfamiliar, intimidating,
Okay,
right?
so that's
A lot
just
of
right
things
in
that
front
they
of
don't
you.
know and don't understand, and here they are thrown into the middle of it. And so talking through some of that at the outset may dispel and quiet some of that, so you can do the interactive piece, get to some of the substantive learning, and then return to some of those questions.
I like your suggestion about asking for the SLP kids, how their perception is of.
You know, I am a real Salt Lake fan.
Contrast.
This is Barcelona, but I do like Real Salt Lake. They kind of start off there,
We close with that after I've explained the rule of law and the.
Fall soccer?
My instinct is I would close with some of those questions, because
I just have to
not
make sure
everyone would have
what else
familiarity
would be
with our system the same way.
I haven't
And not everyone will
watched
be able to draw those
Solid,
distinctions
Because
in
this will create
language.
structure to
since
understand.
1976.
Okay, well, that would be 39 years ago, I know.
And,
because that's
and
what
from
I
your
heard.
perspective, how it
That's the
should
last time I
operate,
really
and
watched
it may
Solid.
contrast with what their experience is. And you may hear things like,
just
I
watched
tried to
the
ask
highlights.
questions and I was told to
I
be
can
quiet
say
and
for
I wasn't
something
sure
that
what to
they
do.
don't
And so I just sat there and let this
I
process
definitely
happen
enjoy it.
for me.
I grew up
What should
playing
I do?
basketball. So
Am I
I played
allowed to
soccer
challenge
for
something or
until I was
ask a
about
question?
15, 14.
Or as a youngster, if I don't
Play
understand
basketball.
something, Can I get my
I
parents
think if
involved?
I could go back
It's
in
not the
time
same
and
thing
change
as
one
calling a
thing,
lawyer, but
I
can
would
I
play
still ask for
soccer
their help or
instead.
for their support? And
Well, sometimes
those
that's
questions, sometimes I think are very relevant to hear someone say yes, and of course you can go get your parents. You can always stop the process and say, look, I'm a minor here, I don't know what's going on, or I'm not from here.
And I have
I'm not
three
sure
girls-
what to
three
think of
daughters
this.
that play.
My experience with
It's
courts
so
is very
much fun.
different. You know, I knew
And you
judges
know
who got
Jeff
paid,
Minor?
for example,
Jeff Minor,
by
the
a
name
ticket
sounds
to have the
familiar.
outcome be turned out a certain way.
Oh,
We
yeah.
had the
Right.
perception that that's happened.
James.
Right.
And that's not at all how
He's
we
an avid
operate,
son.
expect to
He's
operate, nor tolerate
Place.
in operation. That in fact, we will prosecute ourselves
Just
as a
like
system.
how-
Yeah,
for that
is
kind of
James, is
infraction.
Dennis James still there?
And so I think having the clear, same
Yeah, it used to be
common
more
ground
Ruben and
lesson
James.
will enable that discussion to be more fruitful and more candid.
Yeah, I think it.
But I think opening the door
girls
in the beginning
especially,
to
two
say,
things that
how many of you have
sometimes
experienced
they
the law
don't
of the
get. And
courts?
one is that
Have
they
any
can
of you
be
been to a
aggressive.
government office?
They can
What was
assert
it like?
themselves.
Were you
And I
intimidated?
really
Were
like
you
that for my
worried?
daughters.
Were
They
you
feel like they
afraid?
can stand up and fight for
You know,
stuff.
those kinds of questions to open
And then also
the
to just take
conversation
risks.
may very well
in a
allow
good
you
way,
to
know.
get a little bit of
Go out
that
there and try something.
that veneer.
Doesn't work, okay, go out and try again.
to
And
fall
also
away
the concept of team effort.
and open some minds.
Not alone.
Yeah, you cannot do it.
Well, and you can say, you know, by raising hands, how many have been to a government office
I'm Gus Chidler.
here in the
Jeremy,
United States?
Chelsea.
Nice to meet you.
Good to meet
How
you
many
as
of you
well.
have ever experienced the courtroom? Maybe it was going to be adopted, maybe it was going to
Well, I
take
used to
the
practice
citizenship.
at Anderson
Perhaps it
Hall,
was someone being
just down here in
prosecuted
Salt
in your
Lake.
family. Perhaps your
And
parents are
I
no
kind
longer
of
married
went
and
off
you experienced the court system that
out
way.
of
I mean, you
laws
can
on
offer
my
the
own.
examples rather than elicit
my own
their
property.
examples. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Less
Because I know
stress.
it's an interesting, even in a typical classroom that doesn't incorporate
Which
language
is
and
fine, because you
cultural
wouldn't think
issues.
running your own business would be less stressful.
You might find
As you know,
necessary. Well,
litigation.
my buddy was prosecuted for
It's
such and
a
such,
crime.
and you want to say, wait,
Right.
I don't know any of the facts, please don't identify anyone, don't tell me, you know, because you don't want to injure anyone unnecessarily, but you also don't want to create more of a can of worms when you're intending to try to get your arms around. So you offering the examples might allow hands to start to go up. Oh, I've done that, yes, I've been
Yeah,
there.
and there
Oh,
were
I
parents
did, I
that
had to
loved
sit
it.
with my mom
I
at
mean,
Citizenship and Immigration
She mentioned
Services,
how
and I was
it's
scared
very
the entire
stimulating
time,
to go
you know.
debate
And then
with a
say,
really smart
part of why I wanted to
person.
be here is to talk to you about the
Stuff
fact
like
that
that, but-
you don't have to be afraid.
It is.
And if in fact you are afraid and have questions, there are resources for you to get those questions answered.
You know, so
And
my
that's
question
part of
was,
what lawyers do.
How do we go
And in
about
fact, that's
being
part of
sure
the
that
reason
we
why
understand?
I went to law school, or that's why I represent the kind of clients I do, or
For the 1 hour.
that's why I
the
have colleagues who
gentleman
work in
was
such
out
and such and do
here. If your
this.
name was on it, you'll get that for the 1 hour.
Is he just talking about that?
My pleasure. Good to meet you.
I just like to keep a copy for when I write.
Listen, I'm not, it should be on that list, but check with him. I don't know that Michelle would know. You know how he gets his CLE certificate for the 1 hour today?
For
It's
the
just
1 hour
based on the
today.
listing.
It's based on the attendance list, and
So
then it's
I-
turned in directly to.
And then do they send me a copy of by email or what?
Of your certificate? I don't know that a certificate was distributed for today, but the MCLE office will record from
Cindy
the.
Cleary from, who runs the NCLE office, you can check.
Okay.
Or
And the
just check with
gentleman who was
Christie.
checking us in, I don't know his name.
I don't recall his name.
I know he checked me off, I mean, I watched him.
That means your bar number is then you should.
It's recorded automatically, you're right.
I'm paranoid about stuff, so I like to have
So
something
that-
I can scan and put in
Better
my
to
own
double
file.
check.
Not at all.
All right,
Nice
thanks
meeting
for
you.
your help.
Good to meet you.
You too.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
It's always so great to have you in the audience, a nice friendly face, and someone who gets the work that we're doing, you know, knows the importance of all these drops in the bucket.
You know, one of the things too is the new lawyer, CLE, they should put something down to participate in different programs.
At the new lawyer orientation?
Correct.
Yeah. I've often thought that our LRE board should do something for the mentors and their mentees to bring both as the audience and talk about the value of mentoring in terms of our community outreach.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that would be a great audience because there's an automatic buy-in to the notion that you're doing service for one another, your teaching is part and parcel of what you do,
Right.
and that's what LRE is doing.
Right. No, absolutely. No, that's not a bad idea. They need to spice things up rather than having the same old typical things. So, good.
That's always the
Enjoy your long weekend.
Yes, you take care, enjoy the good weather.